Welcome to Sacred Synergy, a podcast exploring the integration of spirituality and the future of our evolving universe. Episodes feature different guests and cover themes of spirituality and theology to psychology, science, technology, ecology, and more. Join us for conversations at the heart of evolution. My name is Andrew Del Rossi, and I am your host. I am a theologian, author, retreat leader, husband, father, lover of nature, and a seeker in search of a deeper connection with and a more integrated awareness of our relationship with the sacred. Over the past few years, I have hosted podcast episodes under the title of the American Teilhard Association podcast. This has been a tremendous opportunity to connect with different guests for rich and engaging conversations focusing on the life and work of visionary scientist and priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. This new podcast, Sacred Synergy, is an evolution of the American Teilhard Association podcast. Teilhard's vision is universal and perennial beyond his work. Thus, Sacred Synergy offers more integral content for a wider audience. Teilhard is foundational to my understanding of not just spirituality and theology, but also of how I have learned to engage with the world. He is my guru. Raised as a cradle Catholic, I felt as if I was only scratching the surface of what the spiritual life meant until I encountered his thought and larger vision of a universe animated by and alive with divinity. Teilhard took a blanket, covered my doubt and skepticism with it, and gave form to the formless faith I had always hoped to have. He put into words the way I believed. He didn't only provide a balm to help heal my wounds and traumas, he filled me with an awareness of the evolutionary fire that burns within us and encourages us and challenges us to continually become more integrated, more sustainable, more relational, more compassionate, more connected, more service-minded, more loving, more future-oriented, and more human. So while this podcast will not focus on Teilhard, it will, without a doubt, have its fair share of content that relates back to him in some way. He will be a point of discussion and connection with some guests I have arranged to meet with, but the goal of this podcast is to reach beyond the niche knowledge of Teilhard and to appeal to a larger audience who intuitively resonate with more expansive thoughts of relationship, embodiment, union, and transformation. What I am thinking of doing is possibly recording some episodes that are specific to Teilhard. That way, when his name or ideas come up, there can be some points of reference to direct people to so they can begin to learn about him and his thought. There are lots of great books and other content available online about him, so I will be sure to include that information within the content that I cover, so you can continue to explore these things on your own time if you so desire. This podcast is new. Therefore, it would be so helpful to us, and I would be so grateful if you would like this episode on whatever platform you are listening or watching on, whether it's a website, whether it's an app, whether it is some sort of podcast platform. Please subscribe or follow this channel, and if you would be so motivated to leave a comment, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, all the engagement helps to boost us within the algorithmic rotation so we can reach a wider audience of people who hunger for this kind of content and these kind of conversations that focus on a deeper sense of connectivity with self, with other, with the world, and with God. Because really that's what this podcast is about. That's what this project is about. I have found my exploration of these topics to be so challenging, so formational, so healing, so life-giving, and so joyful that my prayer is that in sharing it with others, they might find it to be transformational in some way as well. So I am very excited to have on John Keane as our first guest to the show. This was really a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed my time in talking with John. We had met initially just to kind of get to know each other and break the ice, and that conversation was very rich. So there was no doubt in my mind that this conversation was going to be something that people could really benefit from, because John's work with biospiritual focusing really, I think, meets a need within today's world. It speaks to a spiritual process of embodiment. It speaks to a need to be in connection and relationship with our bodies and with the biosphere, especially when we are immersed in, whether or not we try to get away from it, we are still immersed within a technological society. So we are all craving a deeper sense of connectivity that is not found through circuitry, but rather maybe through soil or through self in some way. I was really grateful to connect with John for this conversation because he's been in this field of biospiritual focusing or biospirituality for over 25 years. And he had initially been in the health insurance industry, and one thing or another led him to then pursue the focusing process, where he got his degree in philosophy, and then he was certified as a focusing professional in New York, traveled to California to study with and work with the founders of the process themselves. And he's then gone on to teach biospiritual focusing in a number of settings, including universities, retreat centers, parishes, schools, as well as international conferences. So we're very grateful to have John with us today on the show, and I hope you all enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed talking with John. John, thank you so much for being with us on the show today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you. Very grateful to Joan McManus, who connected us, a friend, mutual friend in that way. So would you mind telling our audience a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do with most of your time in the world?
Well, I guess the first thing people will notice the strange accent. So I'm from Dublin in Ireland. I'm a married man. I have a 14-year-old daughter. And now I work as the international director of the BioSpiritual Institute for the last 8 or 9 years, I think. So yeah, so it's been a long journey in focusing on biospirituality, and I'm dipping into Teilhard's work lately as well. That brought me here, and Joan's kind nudges along the way to bring Teilhard more fully into view. Very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be talking with you today. And yes, this topic is certainly an area where there is a synergy between the world and the vision of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and between the field that you are a practitioner and a facilitator of in terms of biospiritual focusing. So I'm excited to get into this conversation with you today. We were able to connect prior to this to get to know each other a little bit and kind of see where we each were in terms of these topics. And it was a great conversation. So I'm thrilled to be offering this publicly today in this way. So, John, you mentioned that you are a practitioner and a teacher facilitator of biospiritual focusing. Can you tell us what biospiritual focusing is and how your journey led you to this practice?
I guess there's two questions. There's two questions in there. So
Yes.
I'll begin with biospiritual focusing first, and then lead you into how I found my way into uh, the that practice. Um, I guess it was back in the 1960s. Two Jesuit priests, Father Peter Campbell and Father Edwin McMahon, were doing their doctoral thesis on the psychology of religion. And they said it made them very unpopular. People would see them coming, other clerics, and they'd run, because they were delving into the more uncomfortable side of religious life.
Mm.
Um, and through their studies, they began to see that there was a pathology implicit in all the major world religions, that there was some dimension of control, of trying to keep people in place and trying to impose meaning and doctrine upon them in order to maintain the good life, to keep them on the straight and narrow, if it was. And I guess even back then, they realized that the days of that kind of imposition were gone. It may have been appropriate in the past where people weren't educated, and that kind of imposition was needed because people needed a structure because they weren't able to find their own way through some complex issues to do with faith and spirituality and whatever else, but they realized that there was a growing call for people to become active participants in their own spiritual and faith journeys. And if you look back on especially Father Peter Campbell at the time, his doctoral thesis is full of references to Teilhard de Chardin. And there were other people there as well. Karl Rahner was a big influence on him, and psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, among others. So they were looking to see how could they develop this sort of a way of including people in their faith journey and not having to impose that kind of meaning anymore. And I guess the missing piece came from them when they discovered the work of Eugene Genlin. Eugene Genlin was the philosopher, but he realized that there was an application for his philosophy in the world of psychology and psychotherapy. And as he began to look into the world of psychology and going through numerous thousands of tapes of people entering into therapy, he began to identify that there were certain steps that people took when they began therapy that indicated that they would be successful. So it had little to do with the therapists themselves or the form of therapy or the relationship between the therapist and the client, but it was something internally that these people were doing that indicated that they'd be more successful on their therapeutic journey. And Genlin was able to categorize that and lay out steps of how people could begin to engage with this. And Ed and Pete were fascinated by this work, so much so that they went and they visited Genlin in New York. And what Genlin identified is that when we interact with our own living experience, he called it a felt sense. So it's that area of our experience below feelings and emotions. When we interact with that in a certain way, when we bring a certain attitude to our own lived experience, then change, transformation, healing is possible. And Ed and Pete's question for him, and he called this change, it was change in meaning or a change in perspective. He called it a felt shift. And Ed and Pete went and visited Genlin and asked, well, where does that felt shift come from? Is it contained in the felt sense? And Genlin was quiet for a while and he said, no. He said, it's what you guys would call grace.
How about that?
So this really electrified Ed and Pete's imagination. And they said, here we have something, an orientation towards ourselves that can actually, what they be coined the phrase, that can be create the space for grace in our lives. So that this gift that we're given by being kind and gentle and loving to our own experience can actually create the conditions where God's grace can enter into the picture, a physical experience of grace. And it was initially Genlin's description of the body. And I see in Teilhard's work that he's very critical of philosophical and scientific descriptions of the body. That that we really haven't got a good sense of what the body is. It seems to be sort of a transportation method for the brain, or something that gets in the way. It breaks down and causes problems. But Genlin said no. He said our body is the way that we experience the world. And his whole philosophy is about interaction first. So we go back to how do we first experience the world? And he described the body in a way, again, that just created wonderful possibilities for Father Ed and Father Pete. And he described it, he said, your physically felt body is in fact part of a gigantic system of here and other places, now and other times, you and other people. In fact, the whole universe. So you can get a sense of Teilhard even from those words, that interconnectedness, that sense of, and Genlin goes on and says, this sense of being bodily alive in a vast system is the body as it's felt from the inside.
Mm.
So this sense of connectedness, this sense of being connected into more, into myself, into others, into the world, and into the larger mystery of God is
Mhm.
all contained there within our own experience. Just that most time we're too busy in doing all of the things that we have to do in the world to actually pay attention to it. So
Yes.
there's a whole inner world there that it used to be the domain of the mystics and the poets. And it was certainly there in the early church. Uh, but time and again, we've lost it. People have gained access to this part of what it is to be human, and they've lost it. So what Eugene Genlin and Evan Peace have done is to create a roadmap to
Mm.
allow us to interact with this dimension of our own humanity. A place where an experience of a physical experience of God's grace is possible, but it's never at our command. It's
Right.
always gift. Okay. Does that make sense, or are there holes in my explanation? I know what I'm trying to say, so if there's
No,
any.
that makes perfect sense to me. So then my question for you, and it's just one of semantics, is so did Genlin say that what Pete and Ed were asking about in terms of felt sense, is that what he equated to what they would call grace?
um, yes, if I can say it again, and if I don't, if I'm not saying it correctly, they asked them, where does that felt shift come from?
Felt shift.
Okay, okay. So they asked, does it come from the felt sense, that
Hmm.
that experience of being in the world, or is it something else? And general response is that no, it's not there in the felt sense,
Mm.
not there in our initial experience. It's actually in the shift that happens, that gift that comes.
Ah,
And what Ed and Pete realized is that the engine that drives this whole process is agape love.
ah,
It's a physical experience of love and acceptance and gentleness in our life. So if we can be with our own experiencing in a way that we've been taught by other people to be gentle, to be
yeah.
kind, to be loving, then those experiences can change, can transform and heal.
Mm.
So that in the context of love, gift and grace can enter into the scene, yeah, and move our whole story forward. So,
Okay.
so
Yeah, that's powerful. So
mhm.
it's the movement then. It's that
Yes,
it's the
yes,
transformation then one would say.
yes, yes. And movement and relationship is integral to all of this, and it's very very different to other ways of making meaning in our lives. You know, General would say that the the process of change is never just purely in our head. It
Yeah.
also must be experienced in our body. More
Wow.
in, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's wonderful. I'm thinking of a couple different things. I'm thinking of how if we were to use an exclusively religious language, we might talk about the Holy Spirit's role within the Trinity
Hmm.
and how like you have a creator, sustainer, and change. You have God as the creator, God as Christ as the sustainer, and then the Holy Spirit as this change, this fluid movement. And it also makes me think of within Jungian psychoanalysis how Carl Jung talks about this notion of the transcendent function. Are you familiar with that at all?
Not particularly, but if you remind me, it's there somewhere in the back of my mind. If you can just.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so the transcendent function is essentially when we are stuck in a tension between something that our conscious ego mind has recognized and then something else that is being held in our unconscious. And when we can maintain that tension and live in that tension long enough without giving out to either side and saying, okay, I'll just do what my ego wants, or I'll just, go into this realm of the unconscious unwilling or, willy-nilly kind of. Then what happens is there's actually a third position that like forms, materializes, emerges um,
Mm,
as a result of holding that tension. And that third position is an integral position where it's able to see the whole field that our ego mind couldn't see and our mind trying to identify what the unconscious couldn't see. So
hmm.
the notion of movement and grace makes me think of how that feels like grace when you experience that transcendent function. So
Yeah, and that's very much at the heart. That sort of Trinitarian living is very much at the heart of the biospiritual process. And to put that kind of tension in a different way, you could also use the analogy of the Paschal mystery
Mm.
to illuminate it, in that it's a universal aspect of healthy human development.
Yes.
The Paschal mystery wasn't a historical fact that happened 2,000 odd years ago. It is something that's repeated daily, hourly, in each and every human being. That's growing, that's developing, that's evolving. And that's that sense of letting go of an old way of being, that Good Friday. So there's a pattern, there's a way of being that no longer fits. So we're sort of stuck, or we're stopped in that place. We have to let that go. But then we have to wait for some new life to emerge.
Yeah.
So that Holy Saturday is really the difficult part of this.
Yes.
Because the new life of Easter Sunday doesn't come at our will. It doesn't come in the form that we want to manufacture or design. It comes as its own gift, as its own grace. And
Yes.
then there are new possibilities that were never there before. So that sort of movement, that sort of relationship, that sort of ongoingness is there within this whole process. But it's a way of being able to do it gently and safely. Because really, really at the heart of biospirituality, we're using love and gentleness as the container to hold all of those experiences. And in being able to safely be with those aspects of what it is to be human. And to be able to own our own vulnerability, to own our own messed upness. To be human is to be messed up, and there's a wonderful freedom in being able to embrace that rather than pushing it away. And when you embrace those vulnerabilities, and they can become some of the greatest teachers that we have. It sort of turns the cross upside down in a way, because yes, it's difficult to walk that journey. And it can feel very lonely and very bleak in that Holy Saturday where we feel alone. But there's something new emerging. So there's a hope in it, and for me, it's a kind of lived faith that experience teaches you when you can let go of control, and if you let go of trying to mold the world into what you think it should be, and allow some greater process to guide you forward, to live you forward, then life begins to change, and we can start to become the person that God always intended, letting the Holy Spirit guide us forward, rather than our limited vista on what should happen next. So when you do that over a period of time, then you develop a faith in how we're created. We're not created to control and manipulate. We're created to love, to let go, and allow that greater mystery to carry us. And there's a wonderful freedom in that. I'm not having to fix everything, because it can't be fixed anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this practice is fascinating to me because it is, in sense, a mindfulness practice, but the mindfulness isn't in the ethereal in the way that one might practice a meditation or something like that. It's very grounded and rooted in the body. And I know that a good meditation is grounded and rooted too, but it really calls our attention to the body. It's body focused. So my question for you is, where does biospiritual focusing fit within that ecosystem of prayer, meditation, contemplation, those sorts of practices?
Okay. Well, I think it's helpful just to outline a key difference between other forms of meditation or mindfulness or things as well. In many other forms, we go to that sort of contentless place.
Yeah.
Okay. So we go from, all forms of spirituality need us to quieten the mind, to allow the busyness of ordinary everyday life to ease away. And I love that James Finley's. Uh, he has an Advent meditation where he says that there was no room at the inn because life was too busy. And he says, and aren't we just the same? Everything is too busy. But
Mm.
when we get to that quiet place, love can come anyway. You know? So it's getting away from that busyness, getting away from the usual patterns, concerns. Not that they're not important, but they can interrupt it and get in the way of being able to pay attention inside. So other forms of meditation and prayer will bring us to this sort of contentless place, to a place way below all of that busyness.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in focusing on biospirituality, we want to pay attention to what our body is carrying. So that there's a sort of we need to give our mind a little bit of a rest, but not too much. Because if we get too relaxed and then it's very hard to pay attention to what needs our loving presence in our body right now. So
Yeah, admittedly, the first couple times I was reading the book and entered into the practice without a guide, too, I should say,
mhm,
reading through the text and saying, I'll try this myself. It was early in the morning. I'm an early riser. We've talked about, I've got a bunch of young children, so those are my
mhm.
only childless hours, without responsibility, rather, from like 4 to 7 a.m.
uh,
So I think I was not awake enough to really enter into the practice because, yeah, I found that when I was doing it during the waking hours, Joan connected me with Anne, and she led me through a couple
uh,
practices. It was just totally different, and I think I got
mhm,
much more out of it in that context.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Jenlin used to suggest that if people were practice meditators, that when they began focusing, they should stand up to do it because that would keep them somewhat alert.
Okay.
Because when we sit down, we can get into that too relaxed sort of posture. So
Yeah.
yeah. Because we're like, if you think, I've heard it described in this way that focusing, some forms of meditation, you get into the lift, the elevator, you guys call it in the States, and go all the way down to the basement.
Okay.
Whereas in focusing, we sort of stop off at each floor and just see what's there. There's a curiosity for what's there and what may need our attention.
I love that analogy. That's excellent.
Hmm.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I actually just today I finished up giving a retreat on mysticism, particularly like Christian mysticism and the different varieties of it. And that was really something we're trying to emphasize is that the point of the mystical experience is not to have a radical vision and experience ecstasy, but it's to grow closer to God and be transformed in that way. And
Hmm.
that's not like a one-off process. It's something that takes time and builds on itself and is slow sometimes in coming about. But yeah, that's a great analogy. Sometimes you're stopping at every floor as opposed to just going to your destination. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you were saying before too regarding, how our body is essentially holding all of this data, all of this feeling, all of this movement over time, potentially 15.4 billion years worth of stuff we are holding,
Hmm.
and that's just so Teilhardian in that way because Pierre Teilhard de Chardin saw evolution as this unfolding process toward greater wholeness. And
Hmm.
while, yes, we are approaching greater wholeness in that way, it's quite a burden. It's maybe not a bad one, I would say, but a heavy one. There's a lot. It's very loaded. So, I'm curious. His name has come up a couple times, but I'm curious exactly how and when you came across Teilhard's work, and then how you started to see the impact of his vision and connection to biospiritual.
Hmm.
And it's
I
another
think,
double question there, so sorry.
yeah, no, that's okay. I think that it's no coincidence that there's a Jesuit tradition there. Ignatian spirituality brings us into the present, brings
Hmm.
us into everyday living, into, as you were saying, the mysticism that we're looking for isn't to be found at the top of a mountain, after 15 years of separation from the world. Not that if that's what people want, and I've no objection to that, but it's not the
Sure.
kind of um you have that, and then you have that continued in Teilhard's work where, you know, in reading through a lot of his work, it's an ongoing reflection on his experiences in the world, very much grounded in the present, very much grounded in the here and now, and in the earthiness of the now. And I think that Ed and Pete's work in biospirituality does the same thing, in that the Father Ed used to call it the finding the sacramentality in everyday life. So that when we begin to notice things in a different way, when we can look at the world with with a wider grasp, you know, that we begin to see things that we may not have noticed before, you know. And I remember it was actually, it only came to me today, this memory of my dad, and if it's okay, I'll just share it with you, and it sort of opens up this aspect. My dad had been in hospital, and he'd broken his leg. He was in his early 90s. He's passed since, Lord rest him. But he'd broken his leg, and he was admitted to hospital. And I went up to collect him from hospital. And he was sort of struggling to get into the car, and I collected him, drove him home, and got him comfortable at home. And the next thing, my phone went, and it said, my dad shouldn't have been discharged because the cardiologist hadn't seen him. So I had to put my dad with his broken leg back into the car, drive back to the hospital, and into the hospital. We were left waiting there in a cold room for 3 hours. And the cardiologist came in, looked at his chart, and says, "Yeah, he can go home." I left the hospital fit to be tied. I was angry is not the word for it, but I was just really distracted and annoyed, and you know. So I got my dad back into the car, and you know, he was, after being in hospital at that age, he wasn't feeling the best. And I went and I brought the wheelchair back into the reception area of the hospital, and as I did that, an ambulance pulled up, and this child in an incubator was rushed out of the back of the ambulance, and there was paramedics all around, and they rushed him or her in there, I don't know who. And something inside of me just stopped. I felt something inside, and that child had gifted me in that moment, had stopped me in my tracks, and just that vulnerability of the child in that situation. And I went in and I just sat with it, and I said, "Oh, what's that about?" And it said, "You've been so angry all day that you haven't been present to your own father in his own vulnerability." So it allowed what was happening to get in the way of my dad. So I got into the car and I just put my arm around my dad. And I said, "Dad, I love you. It's going to be okay." And we drove home and had one of the most wonderful chats that we'd had in our lifetime, probably. And I was very lucky. I was very good friends with my dad. We were close. But that child gifted me that connection to my dad. And I repeat that story to honor that child as well, because I don't know if he or she is still with us, but they were certainly a blessing, a gift to me in connecting me into something that I wasn't paying attention to in myself because I was too distracted by what was going on outside.
And despite that, you still had the eyes to see somehow. By grace, right? It's like,
but I think it's that creating that space for grace when we develop an openness to our own experience. Then we listen when something is important. We listen to it rather than pushing it away. You know, I could have very easily dismissed that and say, "Yeah, that's very sad." Got back into the car as angry as ever with my dad and drove home silent. You know, but because my body knew something wasn't right, and this child was a symbol, was a gift that touched off that experience and allowed me to see more. You know, so even in the annoyance of that horrible day, even in the vulnerability of that poor sick child, there was still grace, there was still beauty there. But what a different world it would be if more people could see the world in that way, you know, and to be connected to And I think that's one of the real important things to say about focusing and biospirituality. As an outside observer, it can look like it's sort of a narcissistic tool that we're actually just paying attention to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're actually doing is we pay attention to ourselves, because when we do that, we connect with that part that connects us to everything else in the world.
Yes.
That quote from Gendon says, that vast system of here and other places, now and other times, me and other people.
Yeah.
It connects us into all of that intricacy. And I think that brings us into into that kind of intricacy that he's talking about. That there's a growing complexity
Yes.
that's inviting us to live into it. And as I said in Father Peter's thesis, there's a lot of references to Teilhard's work, and it was Jenlen's felt sense that formed a synthesis, that was a meeting point to allow a lot of that to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started to read Teilhard's work, I touched off it before many years ago and was a little perplexed. Well, greatly perplexed.
That's understandable. That's fair.
Yeah. But it's I think I was looking at it more structurally than metaphorically.
Okay.
And of course, there are many ways of being able to read his work, and I'm not saying that one is more valid than the other. But I guess this time I approached it with a greater maturity in my own inner sensing.
Mm-hmm.
And reading a lot of his work, that sort of poetic language, that metaphorical language, it's like listening to a dream. It's like listening to somebody recounting a focusing session.
Wow.
Because that's how the body speaks to us. If you think of our dreams are offered in metaphors and symbols.
Mm-hmm.
The felt sense is the same way. And a lot of the movement that you see in his writing is the same kind of movement, that same kind of relationship that you find within focusing. So this time around, it was an invitation into his living that I found in that way of languaging, in that way of not defining, not offering certainties and definite structures, but an invitation into the complexity, the richness, the intricacy of what he discovered in the world. And I guess that's what really, sparked my attention this time around, and I don't think I properly appreciated that before. Is that it?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I mean, I'm thinking about how long I started reading Teilhard, and it would be helpful to go back and revisit some of those texts just to see how I've grown in my understanding. Yeah, that's I think an important point that you make about how you've made this point a few times already throughout our conversation, whereby our bodies are not just existing in a vacuum; they are the products of evolution. And Teilhard explains how the energy of the cosmos is then condensed within our planet and becomes planetary energy, but then it shifts and becomes human energy. And it's like, what are we to do with that energy if we don't have that connection with our body, with the planet, right? With the environment in that way, our larger ecosystem, not just the natural one, but all of our ecosystems we have and the ways that we interact. And it seems rather fundamental to me, because relationship is essential within Teilhard's thought. He says that to exist is to be in relationship. And how are we to fully be in relationship with ourselves, with the world, with God, if we're not first in touch with these meat suits that we're wearing, right? But they're not just that, right? It's not just like a monkey suit that we have a human brain in and can do all these incredible things within the world. But it is something to be reverenced in a way, as not just this beautiful creation of God, but a wisdom creation in that way, as having wisdom to it. And I think that's just fascinating, because Teilhard talks about how consciousness is this driving force in evolution, right? And he also talks about love. And you're talking about the same thing here, awareness. You're talking about agape love, that selfless neighborly love, where we're just willing to give of ourselves to our neighbor for no reason beyond it is what we are called to do and are called to serve. Um, and I think that's tying together a lot of things for people who, in their seeking in spiritual practice, especially if they're coming out of like a Catholic Christian tradition, might really find to be beneficial in terms of a deeper understanding of themselves by entering into their body that way. Because I found the language to be very inclusive, and for some folks, a practice like this, which is maybe new for them, might be looked on in suspicion. But this is something that I see being so easy to streamline into current Christian practice, particularly like contemplative practice,
Hmm.
that it would seem like a logical aid in our need to have a greater connection with our body and with the earth in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think getting back to your earlier question, and I think that it fits in about how did I find myself within the biospiritual mix.
Hmm.
Um, there's I guess it's almost 30 years ago when I became ill and I was hospitalized for 6 months. I collapsed in work one day, and I was released from hospital, but still very ill. They didn't know what was wrong with me. So my job was gone, the house that I had, I couldn't pay the mortgage, that was gone, the relationship I was in was gone. Life had turned upside down in a moment. And my background is in philosophy. I love philosophy and questions and all of that kind of thing. And of course, my mind went into overdrive, trying to fix all of this, trying to sort it all out, trying to find the patterns of what made sense. And of course, when you're ill, meaning becomes much more important to you because you're
Hmm.
trying to find meaning in these experiences. You don't have the usual distractions of work and social life and all of those other things. Um, but I found that the meaning I was looking for wasn't to be found by rational exploration. Actually, quite the opposite, because what I found was it just got me more and more confused. Because I often think of that movie 12 Angry Men. The courtroom drama. There's a scene in that where one guy turns to the other and he says, "You're like everybody else." He says, "When you think too much, you just get confused." You know? And sometimes life is like that, especially for the messy parts of what it is to be human.
Hmm.
Illness, grief, joy, love, all of those, wonder, awe, all of those things can't be analyzed very well by the intellect alone.
Yeah.
Then somebody handed me Jenlin's book, and I read it from cover to cover, and then I read it again. It was almost as if he'd written it for me,
Yeah.
because here was a method of being able to make sense out of my own experience. And at least now I could begin to take care of myself, because it wasn't in an intellectual pursuit, but in a way of interacting with, the one thing that I could be sure about was that I was experiencing what I was experiencing, and that gave me a place to begin from.
Yeah.
I guess it was after a while then I found this beautiful lady, the sister Mairead O'Brien, who's no longer with us, but she was one of the wisest, kindest, gentlest souls that I've ever had the privilege to meet. But she taught me a little bit and used to focus with me. And I remember one day after we'd been through a little bit of the focusing with the aspects of being ill, I went inside and I came across this huge black hole inside.
Mm.
And a part of me just went, "Oh, run away quickly. I don't want to go near this."
Sure.
But System Rage just very gently allowed me just to stay with it. And as it unpacked it, something deep within my body said, "You believe in nothing, John. You're
Mm.
spiritually empty." Okay. Now, I was educated by the Christian Brothers and the Jesuits, a very Catholic family. Both of my parents were daily mass goers. We had rosaries, novenas, miraculous medal, you name it, and it was all there. But yet, I remember talking to Father Ed about it. I said, my faith was in my head and on my knees and nowhere in between.
Mm.
It, I sense that it's vaguely important, but maybe for later in life, that sort of way. Um, so as I sensed into all of this, I just asked, I says, well, what do I do with this emptiness? Do I go to Tibet, or do I go? And something inside me just said, go back to where you came from.
Okay.
And when I did that, I found a faith tradition full of beauty, full of
Mm.
wisdom. Of course, there's flaws with the institutions and the human parts of it. Uh, that goes without saying. But there was an anger in me for a while. Why is this being hidden from me? Why is nobody being able to show me this? You know, what real presence feels like inside. What communion. I remember receiving the Holy Sacrament one day and realized something inside me just said, so this is what communion is.
Mm.
The feeling of people coming together in a common purpose, together, and that's the body feel of that is very different from the sense that it makes up here.
Yes.
So, and I guess that brought me then into Ed and Pete's work, and with their work, and their approach was a lot like Jesus Christ. And I don't mean that in any sort of a blasphemous way, but their work is full of parables, full of stories
Mm.
that allow you to live into them, rather than descriptions of what you should do and why you should do it. But
Mm-hmm.
they're invitations into noticing, where is your story bringing you? Where is beauty? Where is love in your life? And as I began to sense further into that, then um, I was doing a PhD on illness and focusing on biospirituality, and I went to. I asked Ed and Pete, could I come over and work and study with them for 4 months, and I did that, and it changed my life forever. So I've spent ever since trying to repay to others what Ed and Pete gifted to me in my own meager way. So yeah, I'm passionate about making sure that their legacy lives on. Um,
Wonderful.
so all of that then goes to, you asked about Teilhard. How did I find Teilhard? Sorry, that's a very long answer to your
That's
question.
okay. I give answers like that too quite often. I ask questions and give answers like that. So
but I guess what I'm finding in Teilhard is there is it's giving some structure to my journey
okay.
in biospirituality. There is a sense of, I've always known in the marrow of my bones that it's important for us to reach out into our vulnerability and to be able to own them and allow them to, and if they transform, they transform, but that we begin to heal and just by being open to reality in a way. Teilhard gives us a sort of a much more hopeful vista of the future, of where all of that is going. That each little piece that's reclaimed, every time we let go of control and let into love, we're allowing the universe to heal in a certain way, and that noosphere to strengthen, and the possibility of the Christogenesis, that thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
becomes a possibility, and it becomes more and more possible as each person claims their own place in the universe. But I guess, as you said, it's an onerous task because it needs a sort of a critical mass. It needs because it's not an individual journey; it's a communal one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is too much for one person to take on by themselves. It speaks to the power and the necessity of community.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I mean, for better or worse, we have access to community in a way today through not just in-person venues, but also through the digital world of connection. Um, I would argue it's not the same as an in-person
No, I'm with you.
conversation.
Yeah.
But, in our case today, we're across the pond from each other, and here we are connecting seamlessly. We've had one little tech hiccup, but other than that, this has been really smooth so far.
Yeah.
The grace that is, right?
Yeah, I remember I was teaching a few years ago in Manresa, the Jesuit Center here in Dublin, And it used to take me an hour and 40 minutes in the car to get there because I had to go across the city centre.
Hmm.
At the same time, I had a big group in Mexico. It'd take me 3 minutes to turn on my laptop and send out the Zoom invite. And I didn't have any chairs to set up, or
Yeah.
so there's yeah. But I'm with you. The in-person experiences by far. There's nothing. This is wonderful, but it's secondary to that because there's a vibrational difference in being present
Yes.
to other people. You feel it inside. You know.
Yeah, those that energy exchange is still happening through a screen, but it's not in the same way that it's happening in person, where we're vibrating in the same space a little bit closer in proximity, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a point that you made earlier on about us being of the earth and in the earth, and I think that's the kind of philosophy that Jen exposes is that that interaction is first. We've sort of we've put out observation as our primary way of being able to orient things. Our science breaks things up into bits and pieces and then puts them back together again. And that's
Mhm.
wonderful because we wouldn't have this technology without it. We wouldn't have the lights and all of that. But there's another kind of science that I think Teilhard was reaching out for, a science that includes us.
Yes.
Jen says we need concepts that live and breathe like we do, because all too often we create a concept and that concept comes out of our living processes, but then we contain it and we lock it down and it's
Yeah.
always there. So any future living, any evolving from there is very difficult.
Hmm.
So the concepts that we do, sort of lockdown living, whereas I think Teilhard always wanted to open that up to allow the freshness of life to educate us, to bring us forward. And I think that connection into the earth is extremely important. There's a lot of the work we do with a Capuchin Franciscan friary in the north of Ireland. Here it's up in County Donegal, Ard's Friary. It's on the coast. It's on a loch, and there's 200 acres of forest behind that, Irish forest. So you have the water and the forest on either side, and it's beautiful. And I used to joke with one of my co-presenters up there, Father Philip, says, we don't do anything. We just bring people here and let nature and God
Yeah.
do the rest because there's such healing there.
Yeah.
Just in that environment, just in that place, and just that openness to more. And I think that's something that we all need. Is that and Sister Mairead used to encourage me to do that. She used to say, when you're out in nature, she says, make a little room for the beauty inside.
Mm.
You know, let that nourish you. Let the world nourish you because we take it for granted. We categorize it and say, oh, that's just a tree or that's just whatever. But actually, when we stop and we pause, then we can see such greater beauty. Because a lot of people are realizing that the whole forest bathing and
Yeah.
ecological walks and all of that sort of thing are realizing the power of that. Francis realized hundreds of years ago that opens us up to God, and I think the whole realm of Celtic spirituality fits very well with biospirituality as well,
Yes.
in that the seasons guide us through, the natural world guides us through the rhythm of each year, and that time is more circular than it is linear. And I think those gentle insights can help us to regulate ourselves to the world rather than being completely disconnected from it, which again would be very Teilhardian in its essence.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Celtic spirituality because a few times throughout our conversation so far, the name John Philip Newell has come to mind. Are you familiar with his work?
I've read a little of his. I'm not, wouldn't be hugely familiar now. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that.
so he writes a lot on Celtic spirituality, and he gave a presentation to the American Tarot Association a couple of years ago. And
Mm,
there's a lot of congruence here between what you're saying in terms of this relationship with our body, with the earth, and then what he's saying in terms of the Celtic tradition and how it was addressing a lot of this stuff we are addressing today, but just with time and shift and culture and politics and all that, we've lost a lot of what that is in terms of the culture and its place within spiritual systems that way too.
hmm
Yeah.
and I think that that's really important, especially with regards to um, how we treat the earth.
Hmm.
How we ecology has. We get people who get very angry because people are, and that just closes down debate, or it closes down. And I can understand why people are angry, but is there a different way that we could orient our energy in this way?
Hmm.
And for me, if you can give people the experience of being part of the world,
Hmm.
so that, just as we were saying, that other people are part of our own existence, that we are reliant, we're dependent upon one another,
Yeah.
that communities aren't just communities of faith, but they're communities of being, because we don't have language, we couldn't eat without one another, we couldn't survive without one another. But that sense that I'm part of this, of the earth, I'm part of this world, that this world feeds me, it generates me, and it regenerates. It gifts me in my ordinary everyday living. And the natural response or gift is gratitude.
Yeah.
If we're grateful for this earth, then we'll take care of it. But if we consistently see it as something other, that it's
Yeah.
me and the earth, then there'll always be a gap. There'll always be something that can be used, can be manipulated for profit or for power or for whatever else. So I think that there's a shift in emphasis, a shift in participation. Would be one of the greatest uh, advocates of changing how we interact with the world, and treat it more gently and more gratefully.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about how, too, when we cultivate this relationship, we're no longer seeing the world or our body or the created reality, we'll call it in a broad philosophical sense, as other, right? We're seeing a dissolution of that dualism between matter and spirit in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how do you think that the work of Teilhard and other spiritual visionaries starts to address that dissolution between dualisms as we move in the direction of greater unity?
Yeah, yeah. I think Merleau-Ponty was particularly uh, clear about that the job of the 20th century philosophy was the 21st century philosophy was to break down those kind of dualisms.
Mm,
But I think that there are many, unfortunately, that we have created in ways to protect ourselves, or to distance ourselves from the different vulnerabilities of life, or to. But I think that there's a call to live more fully in the real, on an ongoing basis,
yeah,
and that's not easy.
right.
I don't meant to think for a moment that it's easy, and I think that Teilhard is really breaking down those barriers to reality in his work. That matter and spirit are, they're they're together, they're co-generative, they're dependent upon one another, and that invites us into a fresh kind of a vulnerability
Mm,
into the world, into reality. Uh, Ed and Pete used to talk about the plains, indigenous people in America, the American Indians. They used to say that the bravest of the brave in the tribe would prepare for battle and put on their war paint and their headdress and everything else. They would ride out to battle, but the bravest would touch their enemy non-violently
mm,
and return home. And that's what we're called to do, I think, in breaking down these kind of dualisms, is to begin to touch non-violently those vulnerabilities that we've created defenses against. You know, we can't go near the earth. The earth is only I remember my dear mother, Lord rest her, that uh, that prayer she used to love, the Hail Holy Queen, and it was save us from this valley of tears, and something in that used to wouldn't sit well, that this world had to be endured or it had to be overcome in order for something more. It denied the beauty, the suffering even of this world. I think we're called to embrace reality on a wider and a wider sense. In the same way, biospirituality breaks another one of those dualisms between body and mind. You know, just as the world was a place of sin and a place that could, bring us to eternal damnation, the body was very much sin in those ways. I remember uh, a Jesuit, he's an elderly Jesuit now, but telling me that as part of his formation, he was taught to pray the feelings away because that was the place where the devil could come in, where temptation could exist. You know, there's a huge difference between a processed feeling and an unprocessed feeling. You know, that if it's not processed and pulled away, and that if it's not processed, then it could be develop its own energy because we keep pushing it away and pushing it away. So I think that we're in the process of breaking down those dualisms and meeting reality in a much clearer, more courageous, and in a fuller way. And I've no doubt that there are still more dualisms that need to be
Yeah.
to be opened up and to be confronted. But I guess that's evolution in itself. We can only take sort of one step at a time, and as each of those dualisms begins to fall, then that noosphere, if it becomes stronger or becomes, if I get a sense of that correctly,
Hmm.
that we all feed into that greater consciousness, you know, and that we begin to, that the world becomes more loving, more
Yeah.
gentle, more caring, you know. And again, it brings through I love Richard Rohr's sense of the incarnation, that Christ's incarnation wasn't the first incarnation, that he was already born into a world of love,
Mm.
you know, and that we live in a world of love, but yet we create so many barriers to it. We
Yeah.
create so many hurdles to be able to allow that to be the thing that guides us. And I sense that that's the evolution that needs to take place. It's an evolution of something that's already here, not something that we need to add on to what it is to be human. You know?
Yeah. And when we live in our minds, we can justify pretty much anything, right?
Mhm.
Oh, well, I'll just, or this is gonna, or I'll just,
Mhm.
right? But to live in your heart, it's
Mhm.
much more of a space of grace. And we're not saying negate the mind and forget about it, leave it behind. We're not saying that. We're saying go beyond it.
Yeah, and I think that the word for me is balance.
Balance. Okay.
That we need all of this.
Yeah.
Wonderful. But we also need the body, the heart. And when we have a balance in that, then we can meet the world in a much more healthy and
Mm.
whole way. And
Mhm.
Father Ed used to always say that wholeness is akin to holiness. And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So when we become whole, we become holy. You know, I'm not sure if I'd like to be described as holy now or not, but that's a discussion for another day.
Sure. And that's fair. Yes, because humility is important within this process too. Acknowledging we've never arrived. We're still on the way. We're
Yeah, yeah,
still trying to get there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's the journey. I don't think we'll ever, I don't think we'll ever get there. But it's like prayer. It's like thinking. It's like everything else. It's all part of. And I loved Teilhard's phrase that I actually left the page open so I could find it because I said I know I'll need to say this. This is taken from Sister Kathy's book. It's
Nice.
it's writings in the time of war, and there she quotes him as saying, truth can be preserved only by being continually enlarged.
Mm.
And I love that. There's a real sense of evolution there. And there's an invitation to living forward. There's an
Yes.
invitation into a curiosity into the world, of being able to embrace the world more fully as we progress,
Mm.
and to have that dance. And of course, truth can be, it's not that we accept everything, but the discernment of that truth is part of the journey too.
Yeah, the discernment of that truth. And it's becoming very slippery now with
Mm-hmm.
such unfettered access to the internet and now AI being used as such a crutch for so many folks. I mean, I think it's a fascinating tool, for better or worse in so many facets, but the way
Mm-hmm.
that people are seeming to rely on it and give it a lot of authority is certainly concerning in that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, discernment still plays a key role in, I mean, even, watching the news or it takes a lot of discernment to say what's really going on here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we've talked a lot today kind of about this direction that we're headed toward greater unity, the direction that evolution is carrying us in. And Taylor talks a lot about how the direction for the human person is in the direction of becoming ultra humanized,
Mm-hmm.
becoming an ultra human, becoming something more than what we are now. What do you make of that concept and what challenges do you see in that journey?
Okay, that's a rich question. Yeah, I think the term ultra human really rubs me the wrong way.
Okay.
Okay. Um, it, for me, it almost sounds like, this transhuman where people are adding digital chips into their bodies, so they're
Okay.
becoming more computer. Sort of has that feel to me in that is that we have to wait for something, that there's something that we have to add on to what it already is to be human. You know, I don't think Jesus Christ added anything on to be human. He just was more human.
He didn't
You
use AI.
know.
He wasn't on
Maybe,
chat.
maybe that's how the water and wine came to be. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
that makes sense. Yeah,
But
of course.
it's just when I read Teilhard, I say, yeah, but he he's not ultra human. He's just human, but just more human. So for me, it's about living into more of what it is to be human, rather than trying to surpass or uh, get beyond being human.
Mm.
And I think that there's an invitation, in his writing, he gives us an invitation into taking the journey with him,
Hmm.
into this becoming more human,
Hmm.
and elaborates and shows us the way and the dance and the how to interact with our experiences. And for me, when I add biospirituality into that, then it brings a different sort of a dimension to that whole journey as well, because it brings me, when I read Teilhard, it brings him with me.
Hmm.
It brings the world, people that I love now. It brings God, it brings the earth, it brings the issues that I'm carrying, all of that on that journey forward. So if ultra human is becoming more human, then I'm with it. I've no problem. But I have a real resistance to anything that says that that we're not created in the likeness and image. For
Yeah.
me, you, and everybody else that I meet is, and I don't need them to be anymore. So that's, I don't know if that makes sense, or is that
No, I think it makes total sense. And I don't know if it's just an issue of semantics. Have you
mm,
ever heard the term post-human?
no, no.
Okay. So that's a term that I've heard used, post-human. And post-human is typically used to refer more to what you're talking about in terms of like becoming a cyborg, installing a
Mm,
neural link or, some cybernetic parts to help our functionality. Um,
mm,
And as far as I have read Teilhard's description of the ultrahuman and I have come to understand it, I see it as more of what you're referring to in terms of being fully human.
Uh,
One of my theology professors from grad school talked about how the only example of a full human we really have is Jesus in that way.
mm,
We saw it
mm,
was to be fully human. So I lean that way more with that term, ultra human. Now, here's the thing. Teilhard was not naive when it came to our capabilities, our power, our access to technology. So I would imagine that I'm going to speculate here. I'm going to take the liberty to do this, but that if Teilhard were alive today and he saw some of the advancements we've made in cybernetics and even biomedical technology in terms of prosthetics and things like that. Now, I know there's a difference between a prosthetic limb and putting a chip
mm,
for someone in someone's brain, but then we get into the argument of, well, what if it allows them the ability to see or walk or something like that, right? And that
mm,
becomes something to explore in and of itself. But I would see Teilhard maybe taking a position where that might be part of the process for some folks, some augmentation in some way. But here's the thing. I would think that it's only taking us in the direction of being ultra human if it's making us more loving, more peace oriented, more service oriented, more joyful, right? These inner qualities or that are then exemplified outside. But that's the way I would approach that, I think.
yeah, I love that, Andrew. Yeah, the moment that you say that, yeah, that's if those additions or those add-ons help us to create a kinder, gentler, more loving world, then bring them on. I'll have them yesterday. But then again, you always run the risk of entering into the domains of control and manipulation within all of that too. So tread carefully, but yeah, I'm with you 100% that if they can be oriented in that way,
Yeah.
but it's just you know with some of the advances in AI that we're seeing at the moment, some of that is quite scary, and it's going in the opposite way to that at present. You know, in that
Yeah, I'm going to
sense.
need a lot more convincing before I plug into anything or have anything
Hmm.
plug into me. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess that's why that's it sort of brings up one of the big questions in Teilhard is that, if you're talking about evolution, how can we talk about evolution of consciousness or conscience in the
mm,
last 150 years when we see what we're still doing to one another?
yeah.
And I sense, I know that he would say that that's the consequence of an unfinished world. You know, and perhaps that's so. He also says that it's the way of the cross, that the human condition is that mystery in itself, and as such, we don't have an answer to it. But I'd like that process to hurry up. But the only way that I know how to do it is just by being a loving, gentle presence in the world ourselves. You know? And that's not insignificant.
Yeah.
That's that's huge. You
Yeah.
know? And then let the pieces fall where they will. And I think that Teilhard was always hopeful. Hope seems to be a very prominent characteristic in his thought. That he was always had that sense. And the Father Ed used to always talk about the 100th monkey. That anthropological. It's been disproven now, but it was when 100 monkeys on one island learn a new skill, that it can be that skill is transferred to the monkeys on the next island,
Mm.
so that when there's a critical mass is reached, that new ideas, new processes, new practices start to be taken up by other people. It sort of has that. So hopefully, in the future, Teilhard's work begins to have that, to reach that critical mass, and can have that sort of societal and cultural impact.
That's the idea of morphogenic fields, right? Morphogenetic, is that it?
Oh, okay,
I
no,
believe, yeah, the idea
yeah,
where like different spots of the globe, there will be different phenomenon start to appear around the same time.
Oh, okay.
Think that's the name of that concept. But at any
Oh,
rate,
okay.
yeah, we are experiencing some sort of quickening now. I mean, I've heard it explained previously in terms of just the rate of data being exchanged now,
Mm-hmm.
not just data over machines in terms of computing, but you and I are exchanging data right now in a way that 10 years ago would have been kind of weird. I mean, we could have connected with Skype was a technology back then, but it was certainly not
Mm-hmm.
as prevalent as Zoom is now. And when we consider the amount of data being transferred now between humans, between networks, between systems and machines, it is really sped up between just the data being transferred between electrons when the Big Bang happened and existence was just kind of this electron soup. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that Taylor talks about where material complexity is a big part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And things were not that material complex back then, but now they are unfathomably material materially complex.
Mm-hmm.
The caveat is that implies there is a greater consciousness, excuse me, I can't talk today, a consciousness
uh,
with which to approach that complexity. It doesn't matter how complex the problem gets, our consciousness raises to that level of complexity to be able to address it. So it's a
mm-hmm.
matter of um, going to these unknown places, these places that we've been discouraged from exploring, even within components of a tradition, right, in an institution. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it requires courage and a lot of an adventurous spirit too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where we're not afraid to try and learn because we would not have gotten this far in evolution if we weren't willing to put ourselves out there in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're
Yeah.
being asked, it seems like to me, especially with a lot of what you've shared today, not to continue to go out. I mean, in some cases, yes, but really it's a matter of going in and cultivating that inner awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that sense of what makes us more human in the way that you said, more loving, more gentle, more caring. You
Mhm.
know. And I think that there's also an evolution in our understanding of love. I think that that is something that the churches haven't been great at being able to
Yeah.
share. You know that it's the that there's a, and I think that that's where a faith, a spirituality of experience is so valuable. That as we continue our journey on this earth, that we're called to love in many different ways. And in some ways, that's kind of like the evolution, a microcosm of the evolution that Bayard is describing, that we
Mm.
become more Christ-like in
Mm.
our deepening of that love, of being able to experience it, express it, and share it, and articulate it. Because it's not just one thing; it's a very complex. It's fierce. It's wonderful. It's and it is the stuff of reality.
Yeah.
And it's and I think that that's why the scriptures tell us that Christ destroyed death because love destroyed death.
Mm.
You know, death can't destroy love. It's the only thing that we leave after us, the only thing that remains and that echoes down through the years and is continued on in that sort of evolutionary way that Teilhard talks about, down through the ages. You know, and it's a thing that can overcome the other things that we inherit, the inherited traumas and defective patterns and whatever else that we may inherit from the past.
Mm.
And I think that that's one thing that biospirituality has taught me is that it's not just their present that can be healed, but the past also. So many times I've seen people who have had difficult relationships with their parents because the patterns being handed on down through the generations. They get passed from generation to generation, and the person now finds a way of being able to forgive, to love their parent in their brokenness, and so that pattern stops now. Doesn't need to be passed on to the next generation. So the healing has a generational impact and not just a personal. So I think that there's a wonder in how we're created that we need to live into and to explore. Uh,
Yeah, that hits home, especially being a parent of young children myself. My wife and I try to, as consciously as possible, be the best parents we can be. And part of that is learning from your own experience of childhood,
Hmm.
being parented, right? And
Hmm.
you don't hold those things against your parents that they didn't do great or perfect or whatever, but you learn to hold them in a certain way, I felt, and just appreciate them and love them. You got me this far, right? I
Yeah.
didn't get a guidebook. I'm sure they didn't either, a how-to manual. So,
Uh, uh,
yeah.
I remember my neighbour 2 doors down when Mary Kate, my daughter, was born. He said, "Did you look underneath her left arm?" I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "The instruction book is usually there." He said, "But it's true. But we develop a much greater compassion and empathy for others when we enter into those experiences in our own lives. So you're developing that empathy for your parents and all that they had to go through,
Yeah.
that you're now experiencing. That it's not easy, and when we touch off our own brokenness, then we can have much more time for the brokenness of other people.
Yeah.
Instead of say, yeah, that's okay. That's just part, and sometimes how they express that brokenness, we can have a little bit more patience for, because
Mm.
we have a better understanding of it. And
Yeah.
we know that it can't be fixed just by imposition of control or thought or manipulation.
Yep.
So every day is a school day, Andrew, as they say.
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, we're
uh,
always in the classroom.
uh,
Um, yeah, and we talk about two things hitting a critical mass. I've been seeing the meme has become this super popular modality for sharing little bits of information, right? The little picture, the little video that gets circulated around with some
mhm.
pithy or witty quote on there, right? And it hits home in some way. And I've seen this meme being shared of people saying like it stops here, this generational trauma stops here, and it's being shared now amongst people of younger generations. And I think that's affirming. Now, we don't want to make it a platitude, right? That's
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
danger in that meme sharing. Things are just taken very lightly. But I think it's a good thing that, it's being
yeah,
talked about in that way. Yeah. And
yeah, yeah.
when we see so much of our world breaking down, the systems in our world just collapsing under their own weight, it naturally makes us wonder there's got to be a better way that we can approach these things, right?
There's a famous Irish writer, John B. Keane. He's no relation to me, but in his writing, he's has this sense of that, that the world is circular, that things repeat themselves,
Mm.
but that for that healthy repeating to happen, we repeat the good stuff and let go of the stuff that doesn't serve us.
Yeah.
I think that there's something very healthy in that we can, as the famous saying goes, it's a truly wise man that can learn from other people's mistakes.
Mhm.
So sometimes we need to make those mistakes, and maybe every generation needs to make them until they're not made anymore. And that's so that the impact of those patterns begins to lessen and lessen. You know,
Mhm.
and that the suffering that unfinishedness causes begins to soften. And that you say, it stops here. What a wonderful world it would be if we could have more of that. That there isn't any, people suffering for the sake of power and corruption and money. So.
Yeah. Amen.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
John, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm very grateful for just this exchange and all that we've been able to share with each other.
Hmm.
As we get ready to wrap up here, I'm curious, in addition to your biospiritual practice, how do you find synergy with the sacred in your own life?
That's a wonderful question, Andrew. And I think that to begin, if I explain that, when I found focusing, I used to misuse it. Okay.
Okay.
Because I used to use it, it was only when something was wrong
Mm.
that I'd go inside and notice instead of say, ah. So it's like getting that phone call from that friend or that relation where you say, oh God, what do they want now? Because they want something if they're real. So my body got a little bit jaded that it was only when it was, I'd go inside when something went wrong. But as I started to learn biospirituality, I realized that this is much more of a practice, a living practice that connects me to myself and to other people and to God. So I guess in that way, my life itself has become prayer in that way. That doesn't take away from the other rituals that I find beneficial and healthy and connecting. But I think that the overall orientation is more important than like a friend of mine used to say, I don't think God takes attendance numbers. It's not the number of occasions that you turn up or that you, but it's that constancy of being able to live out a good life in the best way you can, in the flawed, messed up ways that it is to be human. But when we make a mistake, to own up to it, to live as best that you can, and to find God in those hidden places where he or she hides in plain vision so many times. And I think that just glimpsing into that and glimpsing into the wonder of people as they search for meaning and beauty and love in their lives is what sustains me. That's mass for me. That's my church. When I see and as you mentioned earlier on, the courage of people that want to change, that want to become more, to witness those little miracles. And a lot of the work I do with biospirituality is with bereavement work. And invariably at the end of those retreats, it is, every time saying, and I say it from the bottom of my heart, it is impossible not to believe in God when witnessing people carrying their vulnerabilities and sharing them with one another, and the beauty and the healing that's in that. So yeah, it's an overall, the Joe Coletti, who's the president of the board of the BioSpiritual Institute, said that every bush is burning. And I think that that's a nice way to see it. So sometimes we just need to open our eyes just to see that, just to witness it, and just to be grateful. And that doesn't mean that the life can't be hard, and life can give us tough times, of course. But even in those tough times, there's always an edge of love. There's always an edge that we can live into, an edge of gentleness in any experience. And that's what sustains us, and that's what gives us meaning.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, John. And it makes me think of Ignatius too, who talks about how, because you talk about being grateful even in the midst of challenge and struggle and suffering. Ignatius said how the greatest sin that we can commit, in his opinion, was the sin of ingratitude. Because if we're supposed to be finding God in all things, as the Ignatian maxim presents, if we're not grateful for something, that means we're not finding God in it.
Yeah.
That's like a continual reminder I play in my head when I'm, not in the most grateful of moods.
Yeah. But sometimes all that we need to do is to slow down, Andrew.
True.
There's a couple of owls here behind me. I don't know if you can see them. I collect owls
Oh,
because
yeah.
but Ed and Pete used to collect them as well, and people bring them back from all over the world. Well, Father Peter passed away, and these were left to me in his will, and they arrived about 2 weeks ago, and I was like a child on Christmas morning. I ripped open the UPS box and I started, and I think something just said to me, slow down.
Yeah.
And as I slowed down, it became actually like a ritual. And I had a little conversation with Ed and Pete, and each package that I opened and saw, because I didn't know which owls were being sent to me, but each was like a little gift. Each was its own Christmas morning. Each brought back a memory of my time with Ed and Pete. So just to be able to savor the richness of that and to be grateful, as you said, that's so important. Because if we're not grateful for the gift, then we take it for granted. And then then it's of no value. Then we use it and mistreat it.
Yeah, we've got to stop and smell the roses, huh?
And CDLs, Andrew.
Yeah,
Smell the
see,
roses and CDLs. Yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much for this conversation. Before we wrap up and sign off here today, I would just like to ask if you could give any information to our listeners and viewers for how they might find out more about your work, or if you have any upcoming projects or events you might like to share about.
Our current programs are just running for the fall now, so they started 2026. They should be coming again.
Okay.
But if anyone wants to check BioSpiritual.org, www.biospiritual.org. We have a number of designated centres spread across the US, and we have one here in Ireland. There's one in California, Nebraska, Minnesota, and in Massachusetts. So they offer courses there on biospirituality as well. And then the Institute run courses online as well. And ARDS is under reconstruction, our designated centre here in Ireland. But that should be open again in 2026. But if anybody wants to email me if they want further information, I can give you my email, or you can attach it afterwards, whatever
Wonderful.
works best.
Yeah, we'll include links to all of those that you just shared in the show notes so people can easily access that, easily access you.
Mm-hmm.
We're just so grateful that we were able to make this connection. I'm very grateful to our mutual friend Joan for getting us in touch with each other. And my prayer is that this is able to impact other people in the way that it's opened my eyes in a lot of ways to how important this practice is and how important our connection with our body is for the sake of our evolution.
Yeah, and I think just to finish with, Andrew, thank you so much for this opportunity. Just to talk with you has been a joy, and to share my passion for biospirituality. I think myself and Joan were thinking that it may be an idea that we could offer some book study on biospirituality for people who are familiar with Teilhard's work, if they sense an invitation or an energy to in what we've shared here today. But I also really get the sense that biospirituality and Teilhard's work can really complement each other. They can really help to shine a light on each other, and they don't take away from each other. They augment, they celebrate each other. They're both pointing towards the same thing.
Yes.
And I think that the different approaches offer us a wider perspective in order being able to embrace all of that. And see what resonates, see what sings inside ourselves. So thank you for this opportunity.
You're most welcome. And I think that BioSpiritual will certainly have a resonance with the Teilhard crowd. And let's hope even beyond too, because like you said, we're all in this business of trying to raise consciousness in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. And thank you for all you do, Andrew. Best of luck, and I'll talk to you soon, please, God.